In the last video, speaking of John Swallow, I was trying to remember what horn I was playing on. I couldn't even really remember it. Well, actually, when I came to Boston, it was a Conn 8H straight horn. And I eventually went to John Coffey Music Company and got a Bach 42B. So I was always caught by the fact that John played here I go again. I'm not sure I remember the exact model of Conn, but I think it was a 7H. Maybe it was a 77H because it did have an F attachment. It was the size in between the 8H and the 6H. And I'd never seen anyone play one of those before. But I know he was playing on that for a while. And he used to talk about the versatility of it. And John always wanted to be nimble in his playing. So we started to work on the beach and the top tones and the boat saw. And I worked on some of the Creston with him and the Simone Mantilla book. And he really dived into all these things. And he had such incredible efficiency. When I think about it now, the efficiency he had, he worked a lot on air attacks, having somewhat softly and short. And he could play some of these things air attacked and short. That was really remarkable. Out of the Beach book, out of the Simone Mantilla book. And they never sounded like an air attack. The immediacy was so there, creating this immediate definition of the note. So, which wasn't really that common among a lot of orchestral players, and certainly that kind of being able to play short is not common now. In fact, I almost think it's like a style. People nowadays think of it as an old-fashioned style, rather than what that style did to you physically. And John always used to say, he said, people who can play legato can't necessarily play short. But he's never met a person who could play really short who couldn't play legato. So that was very interesting. And it actually has, well, for me, it opened up a lot of insight into the relationship of certain kinds of control. And now someone can get very relaxed in their support systems and their embouchure and actually lose a support system between the two, the support and the embouchure, to be able to immediately go into some kind of short playing. So it's an easy default in a certain way just to play kind of long legato. You don't have to actually be quite as firm. So that was very, very interesting. I talked to him about mouthpiece playing, and he said, look, I have nothing against mouthpiece playing, but my view is this. If it ain't working that well, try playing your mouthpiece. And so he wasn't a big advocate of it. He wasn't against it. It was more in the principle of, if you need it, well, then do it. If something isn't working, well, try mouthpiece playing. He actually told me once that since he was in the car so much, traveling from teaching to another kind of gig he was doing, that if he thought of playing, it would warm him up. Because he never advocated a big warm-up or anything like that. As a matter of fact, it was really funny. That Strauss opera that I couldn't remember was called La Bohème. And I had to play a trigger E flat. And when we were getting into that, I was starting to talk about sound and everything that I was working on, and I was playing certain kinds of long tones, full, and then getting softer, and take a rest, and then play another one softer. And he said, yeah, you're one of those sound men. He said, you and Dennis Wick. And he also said that, when I started to talk about sound, he said, well, sound, one kind of sound is just one thing. Bigger is not better. He said, if I don't have that kind of sound, can I play too? He said, I choose to play the way that I do. He said, what do you want me to do? Sit on a toadstool and play long tones all day long? It really wasn't his nature. Yet, he had ways of doing things and incorporating all these basic things for him that worked. And so, I remember we were getting into the beach studies, and he loved those studies. He loved the rhythmic complexities of those studies. The fact, like number one, all those different accents and the way that's written, with the way the stem is written from note to note, it divides certain things up, the eighth notes up. So they're not really even eighth notes. And then little accents, you get this, and he would kind of and he would play it so just. And one of the beach studies, I think it was number 7, don, don, ding, ding, da. We were starting to talk about double tonguing. And again, to work on double tonguing, he would really work on playing it very, very short, which was interesting. And he demonstrated a very difficult passage for me in that piece, much faster than people. And I went, woo! It was so short and so fast and absolutely crystal. I couldn't even wrap my head around how he could do that. That short and that precise. Because one thing about practicing short, he would say, is it creates a certain kind of synchrony and precision. In an extraordinary fluid slide arm. Very different than a lot of the slide stuff you see today. He went to each position very accurately, incredibly accurately. And even though he advocated having a legato that was more fluid using the law articulation and the natural slurs, he actually preferred a student who actually played with a little more slide slurp than someone who didn't, so they could get the hang of this very fluid legato, and then from that fluidity create more definition to each note. And he also had a very fluid wrist, and he would talk to me about how he would use the thumb in the index finger almost to go back and forth with certain things. So that was very, very interesting in itself. I remember one exercise he did was like F below middle B flat in first position, down to a D, a minor third below that, and then up to the E flat. Some of those kinds of things, and how the thumb would move to the index finger, and then it would reverse itself. So he's playing with these things. He had a whole system that was very, very fluid and exact and fit the circumstance. The same thing with breathing. He never talked about take this giant, giant breath and fill up. He said, how much air do you need to go? Boop, doop, doop, doop. And that's absolutely right. He talked about how people just would depend on the tongue to start their articulation instead of just depending on the air and using the air. And this is where I got a lot of this idea from in my own playing, to use the air in a way that you would use the amount of air that each passage would need. And if you get into that, I put it together that in my own playing that it's like a string player using as much bow that's needed. And everything gets very, very balanced. Very, very balanced. It was really, really fantastic.